And then the last thing is, I think something's going on with our Lyris email list, or maybe some people just aren't signed up, which also happens. So I just wanted to remind you all or make you aware that if you go to our webpage and go to the contact page, there's a link there to join the email list, which you see on the screen there. And Anna did all this page, so thank you, Anna. This looks great. And then once you're within that Lyris or the subscription page, you'll go into general interests, and these slides will be available so you can reference it later, and click on the Healthy Watersheds partnership box. And I think there's one more you can sign up to, but it's the same list. What else? I think I'll pause there. Are there any other announcements from folks on the line?
And I have been muting you, so you'll have to unmute yourself if you have announcements. And then for those that tuned in a little later, if you're on the phone, you'll have to press *6 to mute and unmute yourself.
What kind of announcements are you soliciting?
Any events that are coming up or cool, interesting things that are related to watersheds that you'd like to share? It's pretty general.
Okay, well then this qualifies. Most people I think should have gotten an email through some avenue, but I want to make sure people know there's a request for proposals out until the end of September 25th. The Department of Conservation has put it out, and it's for what we're calling the Headwaters Revitalization Initiative under AB 2551. I could probably upload the document somewhere for people to see, but it's a 7 million acre spatial assessment and prioritization planning analysis for somebody's phone is, I don't know, not muted.
Yeah.
Prioritization planning analysis. And so it's a 7 million acre landscape that involves the Shasta, Trinity, and Oroville reservoirs and the kind of the watersheds that drain to them. So it's a huge analysis, and it'll be made scalable statewide to support other monitoring and analysis in the state. So very tied to what this group's probably interested in. And Allie, I can send you the document if people want to look. Just wanted people to know it's happening.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And if you have it accessible already, if you want to throw it in the chat, you could do that too. Up to you. I'm happy to share it. Great. Thank you, Loretta. Any other announcements?
Good morning. Sorry to interject, but I'm a national rep for the Water Research Foundation, and I thought it would be helpful to share a project developing through the foundation related to climate resiliency toolboxes. I think it's relevant to the second item on the agenda as far as the data portals and data information. I was just going to share some of the NOAA RESA for California, Nevada, and the National NOAA Water Resources Dashboard to help complement some of the USGS data sets. Mm-hmm. But anyway, NOAA is doing some exploratory work with how end users of and water providers are able to work with climate data tools and what their needs are. So I thought it would be helpful to guide this team and this group to some of the resources coming out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd appreciate that. And Anna, the technical lead for this group, she'll be going through the latest updates to the portal, like you said. And so I think, yeah, to the extent we can, let's bring that in, for those that have not been with the partnership over the last several months, this really is a space to pull in that exact type of thing and what Loretta had mentioned. So just to get the information out there of what resources are out there and hopefully encourage folks to use those that are available to them.
Thank you.
Allie, just so you know, I don't know, doesn't seem to be a mechanism for uploading on the chat.
Oh yeah, you'd have to have a link or something to the, okay, no worries. Just send it to me and then I'll distribute it out to everybody. Okay. Thank you. All right, awesome. So if there aren't any other announcements, I thought, it does look like there's quite a number of, there's quite a few new people to the group. So I thought I'd give a quick rundown before I hand it over to you, Anna, to get into the meat of the agenda. But, for those of you that have not been around, we've the partnership right now is focused on a couple of key efforts, one of which Anna will run through, well, both will run through, one of which is updating our portal webpage. In the past, it had information just kind of generally about watershed assessment and a 2013 assessment that California did with EPA and other partners. But a lot has changed since then, and so we wanted to update that portal to make it a little bit more interactive and include other resources throughout the state and nation, like we just heard about, and to help folks kind of walk them through how you would approach an assessment, being really thoughtful about what your objective is and thinking through what data is available, et cetera, et cetera. Then the second piece to that has been developing a watershed assessment or landscape assessment dashboard. And this approach, if you haven't checked it out, look at that 2013 California Integrated Assessment, which the link is in the agenda. But we're kind of taking that general approach, but then updating it with new data sets, new methodologies potentially, which we'll talk about today. And we've been using these meetings as a way just to spend some time working through development of the dashboard. So with that, I think, Anna, I'll turn it over to you. She'll talk a little bit about the updates to the portal that have been done and some of the cool data sets that we've been putting together. Anna, who am I kidding? She's done most of the work here. And then we wanted to talk about some of the updates, the latest on development of that dashboard and get your feedback. And then finally, open up discussion on different methodologies for how we might aggregate these different watershed indicators. Do we use the 2013 approach, or are there other preferred approaches out there? So with that, Anna Holder, you want to take it over?
All right, I'll switch jobs and you can admit everyone in from the lobby.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. For those that can see, I turned my video on. And if you aren't aware, the meeting is being recorded. So just FYI, if you're uncomfortable with having your face on camera, then maybe don't turn on your video or use the chat. Anyway, so yeah, so as Ali mentioned, we've been trying to really make the Healthy Watersheds Partnership Portal more than just a document repository, which is a thing that happens sometimes. And so we've included assessment guidance, and I'll kind of go to the portal in a minute. And for those of you that haven't been on this road with us, we can kind of look at that for a moment. But the most recent updates are an update to the timeline. When we first developed a timeline, I was too excited, y'all, and I thought I was going to get more done and not have as much work on my plate. So it's been revised, although I do still think, I'm really aiming for having, a super early version of what this the landscape assessment tool might look like with revisions by the end of this year or early next year, so before the first meeting of the year for next year. So we're still cruising, and things might pick up, but we had to revise things. And the other thing that has been updated is the relevant data and tools page. So if here's the right navigation, and as Ali mentioned before, if you want to join the listserv, there's this contact page, and that'll take you there. The timeline is on the assessment page, and then the relevant data and tools. So that link down here, we now have a list of core data sets that we're definitely going to be using in the landscape assessment dashboard. These are kind of the base data sets and some other environmental data sets that we're definitely going to use. It's not the entire list. It's searchable, so you can use this search box up here to search for different terms, and the list will filter for you certain fields are sortable. So if you've never been to the Healthy Watersheds Partnership webpage before, if you put it into Google, it's the first thing that pops up. Here's the homepage. There's the timeline, and you can click on the timeline to get a larger, more readable version. So here's the list of data sets that we have for now. Down the road, I'd like to add any data sets that are remotely relevant to assessing watershed health, whether or not they're used in our landscape assessment dashboard, just as a resource, a place for people to go to say, hey, I'm interested in watershed health. I want to search for, let's see, climate. And look, there's a climate data set. So that's how the search function works. You can sort by data set name, source, and then I think the spatial resolution, we didn't have it sortable because there might be lots of things, but let's say I want to see all the data sets with HUC something resolution. So that's how that works. And then for those who haven't been around, some really great resources are the assessment guidance kind of toolbox, which kind of walks through the questions or things one might consider as they're undertaking a landscape or watershed scale assessment. And there's tons of resources there. And for those that were at the last meeting, this is old news, but we do have a list of relevant literature that, again, you can search and sort some things. And then you'll notice at the bottom of this page, and then also the relevant data and tools page, there's buttons at the bottom so that if you say, hey, I don't see a data set that I'm a steward of or that I use all the time that I think should be included on this list, you can click on that link and it'll take you to a Google form that doesn't require a Google account to use. And you can send us that information so we can get it up there. I'll pause there. Does anyone have questions? Okay, great. So we'll talk about this later, but the next page that I'd like to populate is the research and data gaps page. And so there's that link here. So this doesn't have to be like a super well-refined, thought-out research project, but we're mostly interested in capturing like what questions do we have about watersheds in California and that we don't have answered, and like what research do we need to be done. And the purpose of this is kind of twofold. One is to guide us, the Healthy Watersheds Partnership, so that as we develop this landscape assessment dashboard or take on other projects down the road, we can kind of look here and say, oh, okay, so we've said in the past that we really want to know how unicorns impact watershed health, and that's really important to us. So that's what we're going to research next. Additionally, it could be a space for, graduate students or the academic community to go to say, okay, I need to do a thesis project. What's an important question that could actually be useful to managers in California? And they could come here and help build their project description. So I imagine you all are here because you care about healthy watersheds and you in California, given this is the Healthy Watershed Partnership. So if you have questions that you feel like need to be answered, please fill out this form so we can populate this, and this again will be searchable and sortable and things like that. Okay. So for the dashboard update, we over the past, it feels like the past year, we've been figuring out the conceptual model of how we think watershed health is impacted by a whole bunch of different indicators, metrics, what have you. We've refined a list of data sets that we think could inform an assessment of watershed health. I have been in the process of collecting those data sets and organizing those data sets. That work isn't done, but in terms of how the workflow of how the assessment dashboard might work, here's a graphical representation of that. So you go into the cool, whatever it is, probably in our shiny dashboard. You pick, the scale, the spatial extent, the temporal extent. We're going to start with how are watersheds doing now. Down the road, we might improve it so that we can think about projecting health under different climate scenarios. We'll review the data sets by the indicator categories, so watershed condition, stream health, and watershed vulnerability. And those are based off of the 2013 integrated assessment that Ali mentioned previously, which can be found on the literature page if you don't have a copy, stapled and by your side like we do. And then you kind of click a button, magic happens, which we're going to talk about that magic later today. And then you'll be able to view the data, different scores, maps, and download the data and results for further use for yourself or the public or whatever. There are a couple of things that we'll need to figure out as a partnership. So that run assessment where the magic happens, we need to figure out what kind of magic we want to use, what kind of aggregation that we're going to use for the data, how we're going to deal with, holes in the data set, things like that. Are there any questions, or Ali, is there anything you want to mention about the workflow at this point?
I think you've covered everything. The only other, so kind of in this long stepwise process that we've been on through development of this dashboard, we also spent some time before we got to the data set kind of compilation step of going through and being really clear about what we mean with some of these different terms. Some of you have been around for that, but if you haven't, I think, we can share that. But it's just that general idea of like, what are we talking about when we say watershed health, watershed condition, there's all these terms that are same, but different. And so there you go. Perfect. So all of that is documented. We want to be very clear about what we meant with these different terminologies and the sources we used. And that was all discussed with the partnership over the last, 3 meetings ago or over a couple of meetings. So that was it. But Anna, I think you covered everything else up to now.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Ali. So that literature that the definitions are in the glossary, and the relevant literature is, you guessed it, on the relevant literature page. Yeah. Cool. So that's kind of like the long view of how the dashboard is going to work in generality. But we kind of want to get into the magic. It's nice to be able to click a button and cool things happen and maps show up. But the reality is that a lot of thought and programming needs to go into that. And I personally have some ideas about how that could go, but I'm more interested in figuring out and learning from you all, the people that have been doing this much longer than I have, what methods you prefer or think are more robust or whatever. So for some context, in the 2013 integrated assessment, and let me let me first talk about this. So along with that, that workflow, another kind of conceptual idea is there's lots of different attributes like habitat, hydrology, geomorphology, landscape condition, biological condition that kind of impact how healthy the watershed is, right? We're all kind of aware of this. Anyway, so those attributes, because, you know, we have found data sets that kind of represent those attributes or reflect those attributes. And then from those data sets, there might be certain specific indicators. I think of like columns of data that that will be used to actually do the assessment itself. So again, there's the physical and biological habitat condition, water quality, and biological condition. And you know, once we have the indicators and they're all aggregated and you click the magic button, then you get a cool map that says, hey, it's healthy, where there's lots of blue and maybe not so healthy where there's more yellow, right? And so we're kind of talking about this arrow here, right? How you go from indicators to watershed health scores. And so we have the data set, the different indicator type or the attribute types, and then the indicators could potentially be weighted and then aggregated somehow, averaged some, whatever, and then you would get a score for that condition. Do that a couple times for the different types of attributes, and then we can kind of stack those and get an overall score for the health of the watershed. Now, there's addition signs and weights here, but that's just like to get an idea of how, like, potential thoughts of how we might aggregate everything. And this is kind of where I think the discussion can begin of, you know, in the 2013 assessment, the specific indicators were rank normalized, meaning their values were transformed, so they go from 0 to 1, and then everything was averaged so that your relative health score also went from 0 to 1, 0 being not so great, 1 being super healthy on a relative scale. And so what do you guys think? Do you have any questions to start? Can I clarify anything before we start the discussion? But then after that, like, how do you guys want to make the magic happen together?
Anna, can I just make a clarification? This is Lance Lay from Region 1. So the indicators in this graphic could mean any number of things. It could be nitrate concentration. And so when we say that they're rank normalized, that means that the minimum nitrate concentration is 0, or, well, yeah, it's 0, and then the maximum is 1. That's an example of rank normalization. And you do that for multiple indicators. You squash all of those together into another metric, which is the watershed vulnerability, or one of those 3 diamonds at the bottom. And then that's all squashed together into a health score or a general score. And that's how the 2013 assessment was done. I would also add that in the 2013 assessment, there were no weights. Everything was weighted equally. And I would just start the discussion off by saying that, yeah, maybe we should think about weights. And in addition to weights, you know, it occurs to me that the selection of indicators is really important. Obviously, it's very important, but you have to consider that sometimes an indicator, multiple indicators can measure the same thing. And so if we're including multiple indicators, we have to consider, are they giving too much weight to the same idea or same process? So that's one thing that we need to probably tackle, is some kind of like principal component analysis, or something to help tell us, okay, what are the most important indicators to include? That's all.
Thanks, Lance.
Yeah, thank you, Lance. Yeah, and if I guess that would be if Pete, I don't think Eric was going to join until about 10:30 or so, but was that something, not to put you on the spot, Pete, but I am, was that something that was considered with the 2013 assessment, were weights considered and then ultimately went with the rank normalized approach, or what's the kind of background on that approach?
Sure. Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Hi, Pete.
Done great.
Hey, everybody. So yeah, so I have to do a little background real quick. So the approach that was used in 2013, actually it was like 2011 when they did the work on that. This was a national approach, so we were following mostly the method that was developed by the EPA on this, and Cadmus did the work for it. And so they were going roll this out in a number of different states, and California got to be one of the pilot states for it. So we made a bunch of modifications, but mostly we were following the standard approaches. And so that was actually one of the principles of that approach, was that the base maps or the base output would be not weighted. It was never intended to be the end of the story. It's like but they wanted to start as a sort of a default with that could then be tweaked so that people could weight, increase or decrease weights as they felt like it, or as it seemed appropriate. So that's why it is the way it is. They didn't want to make any sort of preconceived notions about what was higher to begin with, but that was never intended to be like I said, the end of the story. So does that help?
Yeah, that does help. And that, I think that's something that I'd love to hear from everybody on. Like one approach may not be to weight or not to weight, but with that user interface that Anna was talking about with the dashboard, one option would be the partnership. We all decide these indicators are the most important to us, and we've applied these different weights. And so when you go into that dashboard, you could apply them or not, or you could customize to what thing is most important to you too, and kind of request it that way, right? Yeah.
Right. I think that's an important point. One of the things we've discussed in the intervening years was that when we've talked about what the wish list or what the ideal version would look like, it was something where people had a lot of ability to turn on and turn off different layers, choose different subsets of data, and weight as they saw fit. So the vision was that this would not be a single standalone product. Say, here are all the decisions we made, here's the assessment, and then that's a static document. The idea was that it would be something that people could use as a tool for exploring lots of different ways of looking at these data sets and different ways of combining them.
That's so great to hear that, Pete, because that's exactly what we wanted to do. So you'll notice at the bottom of this workflow, there's a little box with like default configurations. So if you don't pick anything and you press go, then it'll be what the Healthy Watershed Partnership decides is the best way to assess watershed health. But we can, include that flexibility in the dashboard so that people can say, well, I only want to look at data sets with watershed condition, or I think this should have more or less weight. So that's definitely possible and feasible in how we move forward. So hopefully that inspires ideas and conversation moving forward.
One of the problems, though, is you might
Yeah, and I was just curious with this group. I mean, this is a pretty, I think, specific area of expertise to know about aggregating these different watershed indicators and the different methodologies around that. But is there anyone within this group that has some background in that or different methods that you've applied that, you know, that may be useful for the work that we're trying to do with the partnership? And if not, that's totally okay.
Or maybe if you're trying to figure out how to conduct an assessment and you have similar questions that maybe we haven't thought of yet that we should consider, that could also be really helpful to figure out like where other people are stuck.
Right.
So we say, oh yeah, we should be stuck there too. So, you know, that's helpful as well.
Just kind of thinking out loud right now. Well, what if we did some kind of Monte Carlo analysis where you randomly sample or randomly choose certain indicators and then created in like an index or randomly choose indicators and you aggregated them, and that produces a health score, and you do that again and again and again and again for as many indicators, as many permutations as you want, and that gives you some kind of average score. That's what's one way to address like the kind of the open-endedness of the choice of indicators and how you put them together. Any thoughts?
Are you saying using Monte Carlo simulations you can kind of capture that variability in a better way and see how it randomly plays out? Okay, yeah, yes. That's a good suggestion.
Yeah, I guess it'd be kind of interesting to see too. I don't know, how much work this would be, but kind of like the first mock-up of this dashboard, Lance, that you developed where you could apply different methodologies, right? And then just play around with that and see how much. I mean, if the results vary vastly, then we can look into that and see what's up. But yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about the different methodologies, honestly, to say one way or the other, but I like that idea of trying to address the variability.
I was speaking or had a meeting with, I forget who they were, but they were working on a project, on a tool to determine what water bodies are eligible for outstanding national resource waters designation. And they had a similar approach where they had ecological score, water quality score, and so on, and how they took those data and coerced it or aggregated it together was using some kind of fuzzy logic algorithm, which I haven't used myself, at least not recently. So I'm not sure how exactly it would work in this situation. If there's anyone else who has experience with that, maybe you all can chime in. Even describes fuzzy logic.
Yeah, I've heard of that. When I don't know enough about it to describe it, but I remember when I first heard that, I was like, oh, that's not a real thing, and it is a real thing. Like it's a mathematical algorithm that is fuzzy, evidently.
I have a separate kind of different item to talk about here. Under your overlays, oh, there's like a little feedback. Under overlay social layers, I was curious, and maybe it's already addressed. I mean, you do your assessment, right? You're looking at the ecological condition of things, but when you want to attribute it back potentially to management, would it also be useful, you have regulatory boundaries and other categories here, but what about like overlaying management, like remotely sensed and plot-based management layers? So, for example, We have the watershed mapper with CAL FIRE with all the timber harvest, THPs, exemptions. Those are extensive throughout the state. And then there's also a group at Irvine, Merced, Berkeley, Davis, this crew that are doing, they're actually doing remote sensing of disturbance broadly, including kind of fire. This past 30 years, they have a big grant right now, $5 million grant, and part of their project is to spatialize disturbance in the past 30 years. They use the Forest Service data. They're also using CAL FIRE's data as far as harvest, but also disturbance like fire, and they're bringing it all together. And then where there's gaps in data which exist, they're trying to rectify that. And so it'd be really interesting to hear from you, if you haven't already addressed it, which I don't think you have, how we might bring this into the fold. Because attribution of the assessment results to management would be an interesting next step. I know it's kind of in line with what I need to do in 1492. Have you considered that piece?
Yeah, so for those that haven't heard the spiel yet, I'll give it again. The core objective is to objectively assess watershed health using biological and ecological and hydrological variables. But, we all have questions that we need to answer. Maybe it's management, maybe it's you're with an NGO and you want to figure out where's the best place for your next project, whatever it might be. And so we do want to have the ability to overlay additional layers so they wouldn't be involved in the assessment itself. But with the assessment results, you can kind of see how, if there's a management actions layer, for example, you could see how that lines up. We'd also, like to think about environmental justice and incorporating those types of layers and information into the platform so that it's easier to inform decisions. Although it's important to note that the objective of this tool at this point, anyway, is not to make management recommendations, partly because there are so many people involved, so many agencies involved in the partnership that the recommendation will be different given your objectives, right? But yeah, I think, that's definitely something that we're interested in. One caveat would be that ideally the layers that are the data that are used, especially in that part of the dashboard, would be publicly available, because we really want this tool, which I hate that word, but this resource to be very transparent to whoever's using it. So it's not this magic black box that you click a button and you get something and you don't know where it came from and you can't look at the code or the results or anything, right? We really don't want that. So if there are layers or data sets that are important to the partnership, let's talk about those. And if it's not publicly available, but we definitely need it, we'll figure out a way to protect the propriety and sensitivity of that data. But ideally, the layers that we use would be publicly available so that anyone can tell. Does that answer your question, Maria?
Yeah. And I think it was more like, sure, I see what you're saying about the concern around kind of any kind of concrete, and everybody will have different analysis they want to run. I just thought it'd be interesting to, I don't know, you're calling it social layer. I don't know if it's necessarily social alone, like maybe management, social and management, I don't know. And there's also just sort of natural things that are happening on the landscape, but we are getting this data and then people can use it. But I think, right, attribution as far as what Healthy Watersheds Partnership is doing. I understand you don't want to necessarily go down that rabbit hole, but it's something to consider anyway. This sort of data is also available. That's not necessarily, quote, social.
Yeah, I mean, that's just an example. that I think down the road, once we have a partnership of, okay, what do we want to overlay? Maybe it's data from the census, maybe it's data that you just mentioned, beneficial use data, you know, whatever it is. So yeah, I think, you know, we're definitely interested in incorporating as much useful data and information as we can. But
Thank you.
we haven't nailed down what that looks like yet.
I think it's kind of, so the first phase is just to get the framework kind of updated, and like Anna was saying, just this relative condition assessment done. And then from there, you know, Loretta, we could sit down and chat about those different data sets you talked about and see if that's something that we could pull in to the dashboard for use. The other thing I would, and Greg, I see your hand, I'll get to in just one sec. The other thing I wanted to add is, we don't envision this as like the one tool to rule them all. So it may be that we sit down and talk and say, yeah, that'd be rad to pull in some of the FRAP data or whatever it may be, totally generalizing. But maybe this isn't the best resource for that, you know, and there may be somebody through the partnership that has developed something more specific to forestry, and we could point to that kind of thing. So just want to be clear that we'll do what we can to be all inclusive, but there may be more specific assessment tools for those more specific questions.
Yeah, and Greg, before you jump in, just to add on to that thought, Allie,
yeah.
You know, we have our list of data sets, but at the bottom of that page, there's a list of tools, which again, I really hate that word, so we might change what that's called. But the gist will be providing a list of similar resources, dashboards, tools, whatever you want to call it, that do something related to assessing watershed health. But as you all know, when you build a model or a tool or a thing, whatever, you're building it with a specific purpose. And so it's not going to work if the purpose is different, right? So we want to have some sort of table or decision tree or something so that people can really see the suite of resources and all of the great work that a lot of folks and agencies are working on to try and answer this question of how healthy are our watersheds and what does that mean for management. And so, you know, later we'll be developing that list as well. And not only just providing a link to the tool, but a description of what it is, what it can do, what it's good at, and also what are the limitations and maybe when it's inappropriate to use whatever tool, including ours, right? So if someone says, oh, I want to assess watershed health and tell the managers XYZ, our tool is not the right one for you. Maybe there's a different one, right? So keep that in mind as well. Anyway, off my soapbox. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Greg, what's your question?
Not a question. Hi, everyone. This is Greg at the State Water Board. I just wanted to share that there's a microcosm of a project emerging that's a lot like this that would be informative, I think, to me and others, and I'll do my best to bridge those two. But it's a data lake forming for drought resiliency decision making and like informing decisions. And it's got the same sort of tension between, you know, at some point it's going to provide an analysis, but it's also a place to explore. And then the challenge of having authoritative and consistent data sets that sort of inform it, that are coming from like pipelines of, you know, maybe open data resources or again, like curated data that would be like very unique, but you want to make sure people are using the same data if they're going to do a similar analysis in a different context. So it's a bit of a microcosm of this because I think it has like 21 different data sets, and a lot of those are already like authorized or governed in some way. But I'll do my best to keep the two projects linked, because I think what is emerging in my head is this idea that you need to be able to explore data, and then you need to be able to sort of like also put it through assessment or some sort of informing analysis that gives you something, you know, whether it's a score or a grade or a whatever. So this is not unique to the conversation that you guys are having, and hopefully we can all learn together in the next year or two. So thanks.
Great, thanks, Greg. And Elijah, you had your hand up.
Like grade school, this is great.
Yeah. Sorry if there's can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, I'm great.
Probably a little bit noisy in the background. Okay, just really quick, and I apologize if this has been covered in a previous meeting or even earlier in this one, but I was just wondering if it was an intent of this group to try to come up with an agreed upon sort of set of indicators. And, you know, I know that there's all kinds of challenges inherent in trying to do that, but similar to like the California Environmental Flows Framework, are you going to be, or are we hoping to get to a place with this group where we would be promoting or trying to standardize like specific hydrologic metrics or other things that we're going to kind of roll up into an indicator?
Yeah, let's see. So we are trying to have, at least for the purposes of answering this, what's the relative condition of watershed statewide question. We are trying to come at least to some consensus here, and then just being really clear about why we chose those indicators. But as far as, I don't know how we could standardize it necessarily with like requiring that, you know what I mean? Like we could strongly suggest and be very clear about our path to come there and why that's the most appropriate. But there's no, if the question's like formalizing that standardization of indicators, the answer would be no in this case. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. Thanks.
I mean, it would be awesome if we could, you know, because then we'd all, the big picture goal would be that all of our different agencies or NGOs, et cetera, are kind of using these similar data sets and looking at things within the same lens. And then from there, like Anna was saying, you could overlay additional data sets or layers, et cetera, based on your specific question. But I don't know what the answer is to really make that happen for everybody.
Right, and I think to add on to that, you know, the beauty of this partnership is it's not just one agency making the decisions. Like you all are here from different places doing different things with different priorities, right? And so hopefully by contributing and adding ideas and discussion, that as a partnership we come up with indicators that we think as a partnership are the best or most representative. And so those are what we're going to lean forward with, right? But like Ali said, we can't say everyone in the world must use XYZ indicators, because that's not real. It's not going to work.
Yeah, but that said too, Elijah, I mean, look at the flow data sets. We'd love your input on that. And if, you know, we want to be consistent with the environmental flows framework, which I think we've connected with folks over there and we should be consistent, but we'd love your input on that to make sure it's same.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and so to provide, if your eyes aren't glazed over yet, buckle in. So to provide a little bit more context on that, if you've been around for the past couple of meetings, you've seen this workbook before. This is the list of data sets, and I think the link to this is probably in the December agenda. So you'll all have access to it. Please don't delete things. So this is like the full set of data sets that we considered initially December, January. And as I'm working through it, I'm kind of filtering it down to the things that we're going to be using. And then at some point there will be basically like a data dictionary, right? Of describing the data sets that we're using, the different variables or columns or however you think about it. And then what that indicator is and other information about it, so that we can kind of see and be very transparent about what we're using and how we're classifying everything. So as I get further along with downloading data sets and things like that, well, I'll fill this in and, you know, bring it back to the partnership later. I don't know. I don't know when, to get your perspectives and thoughts and things like that is, you know, like a gut check to make sure we aren't missing anything, if we need to add anything, if something's totally wrong, that sort of stuff.
Okay, so I just took a really quick read through the fuzzy logic Wikipedia page. And from what I understand, this is kind of maybe where it's relevant. So the rate normalization, that's kind of a linear transformation, right? You're just taking the minimum value and the maximum value and scaling everything to that to make it so 0 and 1. Well, instead of using like a linear transform, you can use, say, a sigmoid transform, like an S-shaped transform. That's kind of what fuzzy logic systems, or the methods associated with the fuzzy logic systems, does, is that it instead of taking instead of taking a bad, quote unquote, bad value of high nitrate and a quote unquote good value of low nitrate as 0 and 1, it kind of maps it out in a more complex way, or more complicated way. That could be one option in the dashboard. So when you're going through the dashboard, you have the option to, okay, you have all these indicators that you've chosen for these metrics. Here's how you aggregate them together, and you can choose between rank normalization, which is a linear transform, or a sigmoid transform, or I mean, there's any number of transforms you can use. There's a lot of options out there, and sigmoid transforms are not necessarily a fuzzy logic, but they're used in fuzzy logic systems. There's a hand up from someone.
Yeah, I see, Jim. Okay, and then just before you jump in, Jim, I want to follow up on that, Lance. So yeah, I don't see any potential issues with that. I think if we did have different methodologies, whether it's the fuzzy version or something more linear, in that dashboard too, for people that maybe aren't as familiar with, like, okay, is it going to give me a totally different result or slightly the same, just to help explain to them what those different methods are in a simple way, I think would be helpful when we get to that point. But yeah, I think more options could be good. I don't know. We'll have to try it out. Jim, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand, kind of like I see a lot of these indicators in like these normalized indices. I'm trying to understand the motivation behind this kind of massive dimensional reduction, because I understand why you want to kind of rank normalize the non-parametric distribution, get into something quasi-uniform, take advantage of the central limit theorem. But I think the core issue is more like, say you go through this exercise, you've tuned the weights, the question that raises is, what is your objective reference? Like even if you did something like fuzzy logic, if you put a lot of those fuzzy logic cells together, each with their own universal function assemblies, like a sigmoid or whatever shape you want, you end up with a neural network. But it doesn't change the fundamental problem of, like, if I end up with a score that you've agreed on, it's like 53 out of 100 and it's considered a poor watershed. I'm going to have to go back and deconvolve all that information to figure out what the problem is. So say it's like, there's a toxin in the stream, and that toxin could have knock-on effects on a lot of your other covariates. So there's like causal relationships between a lot of the factors that go into constructing each of the indicators. And so I'm thinking, wouldn't it be just easier to have like each of the core indicators, say like you mentioned nitrate level. I don't know what the threshold is. Maybe it's 2 micromolar. If it's above 2 micromolar, it's considered degraded. Would it be better, instead of trying to do this collapsed version like this matrix that Anna's presenting here, is just say, for a given watershed, you have anywhere between 0 and 35 different flags that come up. And then you can figure out what's being flagged so that you can actually look at it and see what the underlying problem is. I mean, I think that's more of an engineering approach than a statistical approach. But at some point, the causes of some sort of watershed degradation are going to be different from one watershed to the next. And you're going to want to actually decompose it and get down to the root problems. So I guess the summary question is like this matrix that I see in front of me, even if you got the weights right and it wasn't subjective, which I think would be very difficult, is that still accomplishing what you want? Because when you do this dimensional reduction from like, I don't know, 30 to 50 factors down to one individual non-dimensional score, you've sacrificed a lot of information you're going to have to go back and get again.
Right.
Yeah.
No,
Go ahead, Allie.
yeah, I was just going to say yes. I mean, that is, I think with any type of index, or if you're giving like a general condition score, that's going to happen. It's not going to be exact, but I think the purpose of this is at least let's get that relative score out there so we have a general starting place. And then you could, I think maybe that's the next step, right? Like maybe we could dive in a little bit more deeper. And I'm not a data scientist, so I don't know how this would actually work, but maybe there is a way to be able to parse out more specifically what went into that score and where there may have been a flag, or, you know, whether it's nitrate or some toxin in the water, etc. But this would be like a relative starting point or a base to work from. But yeah, I mean, it's trying to simplify very complex systems, right? So it's a great point, Jim. We'll just leave it at that. Anna, what did you have to say?
Yeah, well, to add on to that, you know, like I said, I don't want this to be like a black box that people can't figure out what they're looking at, right? So I like my kind of vision is to have like the overall score, and then enable users to kind of dig in, like you mentioned, to see like where that score came from, what metrics or conditions are doing well wherever, and what's not so great, and figuring out where those issues are. So when we get there, I'd love your feedback on the specifics of what that should look like. But I do think having something like that so that people can dig in and see, you know, if there are weights, what the weights were, all that junk. But if at the base level you just want, is this watershed healthy? We can give you that answer. And if that's all you need, then great. But understanding and being able to dig deep, all the way to downloading the data and looking at that one record, we want to be able to enable that.
Thanks, Anna.
Allie, this is Pete.
Yeah.
Again.
Hey, Pete.
Yeah, so those are, I thought a couple good comments by Jim there, but let me address at least a couple aspects of them. So one of the things that we identified, if you go back to that report and look in the recommendations and next steps things, we were very keenly aware at that time that there were, you know, major challenges in trying to take what we had put together and turn it into something usable. And you hit on a couple that I want to comment on a bit further. So one of them is not all indicators are equal in the sense that not some indicators are, you have threshold effects and other indicators don't. So most of I think almost all those indicators were turned into these, you know, by turning them into a relative scale, we lost information about thresholds. So you mentioned, you know, water quality indicators, but this was especially true for biological indicators, where we've put a lot of work into identifying scores that represent healthy systems, right? So if a biological community health score ranges from say 0 to 1 or 1.3 or something, and we say in our index development that anything over say 0.8 represents a healthy system, that kind of threshold is lost the way that we did it, right, in this relativized scoring. So I think that's an important thing to address in this next round, is which indicators can be relativized easily and which ones you need to retain the categorical, the threshold categories for it to have much meaning. And the second is, I totally agree with you about the challenges of composing and decomposing a lot of indicators. You know, we've got, but I think, you know, as Allie's response, I think is right. You know, as managers and scientists working together on these issues, there's this sort of natural tension, I guess, between the need to roll things up into relatively simple pictures of where we have problems, where we don't have problems, that can be used to communicate at a really high level, but then still be able to drill down to get at, as you say, what is the specific issue wrong in this HUC, at this HUC 12 level, or even HUC, even finer resolution. So, yeah, it has to happen, but I think if you let that stop you from rolling things up, then you miss out on one of the most important reasons for doing this in the first place, which is communicating at a high level. So that's it.
Okay, thanks, Pete. And Poyam, you had your hand up a little bit earlier. Did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Oh, it's hard to hear you.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Is that better?
Yeah, a little better.
Okay, great. My mic is great. I appreciate those comments, and most of the times where I've used sort of higher level assessments to identify sort of restoration priorities, we have these thresholds. Identifying locations where we have limited habitat or where we have the potential to create new habitat. We use certain thresholds, whether that's time and duration thresholds or flow velocity thresholds. We've used stream power to identify sort of locations in the watershed, and there's a rating, and depending on where the stream power falls within that rating, we say, oh, this area is identified as a problem, and then we'll correlate that with field observations and stuff. But that's often used as this high-level way of just sort of identifying where likely problems are. And so that idea of, oh, okay, how many of these watersheds have exceeded thresholds in this number of inputs makes a lot of sense in terms of watersheds with issues than others. If you're able to think of it like being able to identify these indicators on some kind of map, weighted or not weighted, then you could have those different data sets however it's decided to aggregate those data sets. You could have the aggregated value as an option to look at, but then you would still be able to have the unweighted sort of indicators available to look at separately, even if you didn't know or didn't have access to adjust. So that you could see, I guess what I'm just trying to say is the value in being able to see where different indicators lead certain thresholds so that they can be identified in red or even quantified, saying, this indicator's over this threshold, then you could compare watersheds. Oh, this one is over these indicators and this one is over those same ones.
Thanks, Poyam. I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing you, but
sorry about that.
Okay. That's much better.
Sorry about that, but I don't know if you got sort of the gist of what I was saying. Just the value of having those thresholds. That's the way that we've done a lot of our assessments, large scale assessments, is being able to compare indicators, and so that have exceeded certain thresholds, we'll just identify those locations on a map, and so being able to have that comparison of the individual indicators in addition to the aggregated watershed health, I think would be very valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a follow-up question for you too, just about what other indicators that you do consider along with stream power to inform your selection of locations for restoration, and if if you have any examples, if you could share that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so it was a while ago, I worked on a project with CBEC. They're in West Sacramento. They're a small stream restoration firm.
You got to get closer to your mic. Can't hear you at all.
Is that better?
I can hear you.
Okay. There was a small firm in West Sacramento, CBEC, and they've done that work with stream power. I don't have those project examples on hand, but they've used that metric to identify locations in the stream where there's likely erosion issues. But then we've also used time and duration values for flow, or for velocity and depth for salmon. So, we're looking at a whole river. We can identify certain locations that don't meet the velocity and depth criteria at certain locations in the river. That's an indication that we're lacking habitat in those areas. And so by looking at that overall metric, it gives us an idea of where to look for opportunities. We've done something similar with like sort of floodplains. So the timing and duration that those floodplains are flooded to a certain depth gives us an indication of where it may be likely to find opportunities to increase habitat for rearing habitat. Those are the indicators that I can think of off the top of my head, but I'm sure there are probably others I'm not thinking of. And then, like was mentioned before, there's the social indicators for Sierra Streams Institute. Did the watershed assessment for the Bear River watershed to identify restoration opportunities. They had large stakeholder groups. So there's that's a very different kind of process, but it speaks to these, multiple factors involved where, there's different agency priorities. There's a disturbance assessment where they go in and physically identify where there's erosion and stuff like that. I don't know how that exactly could be incorporated here, but they do use monitoring data, water quality, temperature, measurements of bentho macroinvertebrate populations. Certain fly populations can be used as an indicator of stream health, stuff like that.
Right.
So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that was helpful. And I mean, with that local example too, I think that would be, if you don't mind sharing that, sending it to Anna and myself, and we'd be happy to include that on the portal page.
I'll reach out to try to find those resources.
Yeah.
I don't have them, in my files, and unfortunately, I've recently been evacuated, so I don't have.
Oh God, I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's okay. Yeah, I mean, it's what it is, but I don't have access to everything really. I'm kind of working on a kitchen table right now.
Don't worry about it. I can do Google search and probably find it.
But what I'll do is I'll reach out and email those people and see, and I'm wondering if I could CC some of you. I don't know who exactly I would include. Maybe that would be helpful.
Okay, yeah. Just if you don't mind sending it to me, Allie Dunn, and then I'll share it with the group. But yeah, as far as fitting that in, I think that it's more at the local scale too, and some of those approaches I think would be helpful. So if you have this, kind of getting at what the discussion was earlier, that these scores are going to give you that relative condition, but then you kind of dial in and drill into local conditions. So I think the approach that you took, that might be like the next step to really figure out at that reach scale what's going on, what's how badly eroded is it, etc. Eric, did you have anything to add on that? I see in the chat there that Eric Steins worked with CBEC as well, and just some of the indicators in regards to hydromod, and that might be something to pull in. Yeah. Hey, Eric.
Hey, Alex. Oh, no, sorry, I was late. I was coming from another meeting. So I'm familiar. I've worked a lot with Chris Bowles at CBEC over the years, and Chris was involved years ago when Greg Gearhart was in running the stormwater unit at the State Water Board, and developing a series of hydromod indicators that could be used to prioritize reaches for restoration. And some of those are things that could be done from sort of a GIS-based analysis, and some were field-based. And so I think that may be I remember working with Chris to adapt some of those for some of the systems he was working on in the Sacramento area and some of the surrounding watershed. So there's probably some resources we can draw from there.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And then let's see, I just want to check the chat real fast because there have been some questions and comments. I don't want to miss you guys. Dan, did you want to chime in? She had a comment about going back to the engineering idea. And Jim, I saw your hand up, so feel free to chime in on this. And that they're with, she's with the Department of Pesticides, that they're taking a similar approach. Dan, did you want to talk at all to that?
Hi, Ali. Can you guys hear me?
I can. Yeah. Hi.
Okay. Hi. Good morning. So this is Dan Wang from California Department of Pesticide Regulation. So we are doing some kind of assessment focusing on pesticide, but we use approach similar as this approach here, that we're taking lots of data, mainly from watershed health and conditions, and other data including social status. And our approach is like Jim proposed, is to take all the factor in, build some kind of a statistical learning model, and trying to identify the most important factors. So in that process, we're not reducing the dimension of the data, but try to learn from the pattern of the data. I just thought that was some kind of ways to interpret the data that could be useful for this team as well. And our eventual goal for that model is to predict the pesticide concentration in surface water. However, it can be used to categorize watershed health into different levels of concern, or even calculate some kind of a score if you have the training data. That's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Jim, did you want to follow up on that? I saw your hand up earlier, so just want to make sure you get your thoughts in.
I'm not really sure because I haven't read, I have to admit I didn't read all 120 pages of the report, but
Oh, what?
I wanted to say that, like, you know, the examples that I saw, just what the last speaker mentioned, was with the Environmental Flows Working Group and with the Stream Health Working Group, getting a set of reference sites and then just looking at expectations versus what you observe. And so the Environmental Flows Work Group the Nature Conservancy created a really good interactive tool. I can't remember the URL at the moment, but they had actually predicted kind of how good the flow was based upon a training data set of observed sites. And they could predict the expected versus the observed flow parameters, and they could determine how degraded that flow was. And I think something along those lines works pretty well. And I know the Stream Health people are doing something similar with the CSCI and the ASCI. And so that's what I was kind of envisioning, and similar to what Poyam was saying, is like, instead of reducing all that information, you just say, look, here are the 30 to 50 parameters, and of those, these are the ones where the expectation falls way below the observation, like in the 10th percentile or less. And then you know, well, this is how significantly degraded or undegraded a certain site is. So I think I can leave it there.
Okay. Yeah, and so with this approach, and Pete, feel free to chime in as the CSCI guy, but the approach would be pulling in those indices as well as the eFlows kind of framework into that. How that's all done, I defer to Lance and Anna. But that is just, that is the approach that we are taking, is making sure that we're pulling in all these different approaches.
Yeah, I put the URL in the chat for the Natural Flows database.
Oh, and yeah. Thanks, Eric. So that is actually on our set list. So we're already trying to figure out how to use that one as well.
Right. Yeah, so that's kind of the point we're at, right? Like we're aware of all of these really awesome approaches and data sets. So now it's figuring out these different methodologies, which I'm kind of hearing that, we don't necessarily have to say we're going rank normalized, right? But I think it would be good to have like, can the partnership come to some general agreement on like our default method, but then the user could do some of these other approaches, like the fuzzy approach or the things that Lance had mentioned earlier.
And then the other thing I'm hearing too is at some point we'll have to have a discussion about scale, right? So I think Marguerite McCann asked a question about how would this assessment address the issues in which different metrics are collected in different areas of the state. And so we're going to have some data sets that are satellite imagery, and then we're going to have some data sets that are site specific, and figuring out how we scale up and down and conduct a landscape watershed scale assessment without having to go watershed by watershed, right? And then also drilling down and maybe conducting an assessment with different data sets, however we want to do it on the stream reach scale, are things that I think we'll have to figure out down the road. And then the other thing that I'm also thinking about, which I can't really speak to much of it yet, but we're going to be looking at all these data sets, and as much as we'd all like to have perfectly sampled, randomly distributed, robust data sets for every stream in the state, that's not a thing always, right? So figuring out how to deal with data gaps. Do we impute them if at some point we don't exclude that data set? So having those sorts of conversations and discussions, I'm hoping to be able to speak deeper into that during the December meeting when I have more data sets together, and we can kind of get a better idea of where those gaps are and which data sets have them and things like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, did we have that data imputation topic yet in previous meetings, or is that coming up?
I think you led the discussion on that.
Yeah.
Last year. So I need to revisit it. But I think that'll be something that we talk about coming up at this point. And the reason why we're kind of having these discussions in this order is because I'm trying to get enough information so that when we're building the beta version of this, we can have something to show and see where the challenges are. Data imputation will obviously be one of them, but we won't be at the point where, if we run the assessment, we're not going to be using that information. It's just a example, kind of sandbox practice. So yeah, that deeper discussion will be down the road. Maggie, did I answer your question, or is there more that you wanted to know about that?
Yeah, you answered my question. Thank you. I can just see that being kind of an issue if there's certain indicators that are driving scores more than others, but they're only collected in certain areas. With our group with CMAF, we're really trying to consider how the state is so different in different watersheds, and how to have a statewide assessment that can incorporate those kind of differences.
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally we'd use, all the data sets under the sun, but I think when you're trying to conduct a statewide assessment, there might be data sets that we simply don't use because they're only collected in a single watershed or small, areas, but maybe we bring those in after the assessment so you can kind of plop them on top and see how it relates. I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer yet, but that's something that we can talk about. Or as Lance mentioned, maybe if the data set is just so important, then we impute it, or, expanded out using statistical methods.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's kind of the same discussion as earlier too, where it's like we start somewhere with these like, basic attributes of watershed condition and get some idea of relative condition. Then you can, I don't know if this dashboard necessarily will cover all the things like Anna was saying, but there are ways to give kind of that relative. There are things throughout every watershed that, like the bugs, for example, like someone had mentioned the CSCI score. So there are some things we can do to give us a general sense of how things are going on. And then each watershed, you're right. I mean, they're very complex, and there's going to be more specific metrics that you might want to dive into. And I think that would be a more specific assessment, right? So, but if we can do it, we will try. I don't know that this is the space to do all the things.
Right. And at the very least, I think including a list of those data sets and the scale at which they're used on our data sets page, so that someone can say, I'm really interested in data sets that are only available on the North Coast, so that I can kind of do my own thing. But having those sorts of resources available so that it's available and transparent.
Right.
Thank you, guys. I'm excited to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, glad you're here.
And it looks like we had a jargon giraffe moment. Leslie, I think, was asking about what CBEC stands for, if you can't see the chat. And Eric says, it doesn't stand for anything. Anyway, and provided the link.
Yeah, and actually there may be, I think what Poyam was talking about, there is a rapid geomorphic assessment approach that they take, which a lot of it is you can do from your desk, but then there's some follow-up field work to kind of validate some things. So I'm happy to share that with the group too, for those that maybe it piqued their interest. CBEC may even have it on their page, but I'll send that out. So any other thoughts on how we're gonna smush everything together and come up with these relative health scores?
If we think of this assessment dashboard as kind of a screening tool, there's one thing we should probably be mindful of, and I think other folks have kind of alluded to, is that there could be false negatives. It could be watersheds or whatever spatial scale you're assessing at that look healthy, but actually they're not. And how do you figure it out? How do you, there has to be some kind of uncertainty. And then maybe that uncertainty allows you to say, okay, these are the rankings, but some of these rankings we're not really certain. Maybe we should use it to kind of dig in. There should probably be a way to identify watersheds that should be looked into, and maybe using uncertainty is one way to do it.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, Lance. I like that.
And the other way, this is Eric, the other way, I mean, obviously I missed part of the earlier conversation, but something like the watershed condition might be more universal given the data sets that go into it. And it could be that, that's more universal across the state, whereas some of the other layers maybe are more specific based on data availability. Or you could also some scaling where sort of like what Lance was getting at, I think, where you could have an answer at more of a coarser scale where you have large data gaps. Your answers might only be available at a coarser resolution because of some aggregation and interpolation. And in some cases where you have higher data availability or density, you would be able to tunnel into or zoom into a finer scale. And so part of that can be addressed just by some variable scales of resolution that are available based on data availability. So I think there's a couple ways we could maybe address it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that.
This is Elijah. I just had a quick question about scale. You know, I know Pete mentioned something about HUC 14s earlier in the conversation, and you know, and I assume that kind of these tools that we're all talking about, and indicators and metrics, could be used at a variety of different spatial scales. But I wonder if there's an effort to try to sort of identify a sort of minimum watershed size or drainage area that we sort of collectively can agree on as a good size for some sort of management efforts. And just sort of along those lines, you know, our CDFW CMAP group was looking into the process of delineating HUC 14s across the state, because as many of you on this call probably know, there's not a statewide data set for that size watersheds in the NHD's watershed boundary data set layer, but there's an interest in developing that. And anyway, if there's anyone involved in the partnership that whose group or program also has a sort of strong interest in getting that HUC 14 size data available, it'd be great to chat with those folks offline, or you know, even now if you want to. But basically we you know, looked into some of the technical details of cost and geoprocessing and everything, and there's some interest amongst the California data stewards of the NHD data set in potentially helping with this effort. So if folks want to talk about that, please get in touch with me. Thanks.
Anna and Ali, what was the scale for the 2013 assessment? I do recall it being pretty small. Like, was it planning watershed or
HUC 12, Lance.
HUC 12? Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah, like that's the go-to for water boards. Yeah.
Are the Cal-Water planning watersheds, are they smaller than the HUC 12s, or are they roughly the same size?
I do not know that. I don't know. Is Nick on? He has a background in this stuff.
I was just gonna ask that.
Yeah.
I see him. He's there. He's muted though.
Yeah, if Nick doesn't chime in, I can check on that, Lance. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that might answer some of Elijah's questions, at least for what we did in the past.
I think it varies, to be honest. Sometimes it's HUC 10, sometimes it's HUC 12. But because each region that does their assessment has the ability to define their watersheds differently. For example, you know, Region 1 decided its own method versus Region 4. It varies in Cal-Waca, unfortunately.
Thanks, Nick. Awesome. Well, it sounds like we have a lot of work to do, y'all. And if folks don't want to discuss or don't have anything else to discuss, I'm happy to give you an hour of your life back. So, let's see here. The next meeting is December 9th. It will probably be just like this, virtual. Please do sign up to the listserv to stay up to date on agendas and what's happening. And again, you can do that on the contact page of our website. And then if you have any other ideas or thoughts, feel free to, between now and December, feel free to send them to Ali or myself. Adding my email in the chat, so that we can, you know, put those into our thought process moving forward. And if you have additional data sets you'd like to see on the website or literature, please utilize those forms on those pages and let us know. I do check them, so it won't be ignored. And then again, if you have questions, research and data gaps, please include them in this form as well. I'd love to kind of get a sample of what everyone here is thinking about and what questions they have, and before the December meeting. So as we start building this thing, maybe we can answer some of those questions or not. And Nick said I'll be presenting at a conference on September 16th as well. So there's that. Allie, did you have anything else you wanted to add? Have I successfully put everyone to sleep? It's always my goal is to really get you guys napping.
Oh, hi. If you can hear me, I'm not asleep at all. This is Mary.
I am Mary.
Anna, you done really well. I've been really interested in all the discussions, but I decided I shouldn't interfere by, making generalized comments. So I just want you to know, I think you did really well in the meeting.
Thanks.
And really fascinating discussions.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, last call. Anything in the chat? Will I be providing a draft of analytical methods you're considering for the various indicators for comment? Definitely. I don't know in what form that will be or when specifically, but yeah, before we finalize anything, we'll be sending a draft of something out for everyone's feedback. And then Eric, the December 9th meeting will probably be, around the same time in the morning. Ali lost connection.
This is Wyoming again. I, after all this fire situation calms down a little bit, I will talk to Sierra Streams Institute. One of the things that they're very interested in right now, they're working on growing, is sort of localized data gathering. They do a lot of stream monitoring and other types of monitoring. And how can we house that data in a shared database so that we can share information with other organizations? And they do, like I said, they did the Bear River watershed assessment. They're interested in how do they aggregate that data and use it for any kind of studies. So I'll talk to them about this project and try to stay connected and see if there's any way we can work together.
Yeah, that sounds great. And the Healthy Watersheds Partnership is is open to everyone. So if they want to tune in December, join the listserv, all are welcome.
Okay, great, thanks.
And it looks like Peter Haupt says the Sierra Streams Institute does contribute to Swamp and Seedon, and we'll be pulling data from that database. So maybe they've already figured it out and taken care of it. But maybe there's more to learn. Okay. Well, thanks for tuning in, everyone. It was really great to check in and have a really awesome discussion. And we'll keep you updated as more things progress. And other than that, we'll hopefully talk to you in December or via email. Stay cool, stay safe. Do you want me to dance for you? I think we're good.
Are people allowed to comment on this?
Yeah.
Oh, hi. I didn't know if this was live or what. This is Patricia McPherson, Grassroots Coalition. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my time on this, that it goes until 12, and it's, unless the time changed?
No.
If we have a time change I'm not aware of?
No, we went through.
Hello?
Your sound dropped out there, Allie.
I had an issue that I wanted to bring up with you guys and see if it was, and in discussion with other groups across the country on all these watershed issues, it hasn't been addressed. So I just thought I'd bring it up and see if, but I don't know if we're going to get Anna back.
No, yeah, they're trying. Sorry. Can you hold that for just a second? Look like a lot of people got kicked off, and then they're trying to get back in. And
sorry about that.
Looks like
Oh, great, you're back.
Yeah.
So could I bring up an issue that I'm just wondering about that while you guys are still on the line?
Yeah, of course.
We have, well, as you know, there's the groundwater sustainability action that's going on all up and down the state and looking at all our watersheds and blah, blah, blah. What seems to be missing is, especially for along the coast, is protection to freshwater, groundwater. A lot of areas have curtains and they're injecting water, so on and so forth, but there are basins that are all regard to habitat that relies upon that fresh groundwater. And so I'm wondering, with everything that, and I'm sorry for getting in on this late today, but from what I've read, I don't see attention being paid to that issue in particular. Everyone is always saying, well, a specific site evaluation would need to be done in order to determine that. But I just want to put it out on the table that, for instance, here in Los Angeles and also along the coast of California, one of the largest restoration for a wetland that is ongoing is the Ballona wetlands. And we have 3 major underlying aquifers that are classified as drinking water. And those waters are being jeopardized with, number one, pumping and diversion of this groundwater that certainly Grassroots has been addressing with the California Coastal Commission to see, well, illegal drainage stopped, but also we're working to get the diversion, the pumping and diversion and throwaway of all of this good freshwater groundwater that is being either thrown out into the ocean or thrown into the sanitary sewer. And it's an issue that while Ballona is a specific site, I think it's a good model to use for protection of the groundwater resources. That's not happening. And we certainly spent $140 million to acquire Ballona wetlands in 2004, and it is now classified, it's got the highest classification for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife as an ecological reserve. It is a freshwater dependent wetland. And we are having difficulties in garnering that fresh water back to Ballona. This is also an environmental justice issue. We have native Gabrielino Tongva natives that have classified this area as a sacred site that are also working to see this freshwater restored and not abused and taken away. So are you guys discussing any of those kind of issues from a habitat perspective?
To date, our focus has been on trying to conduct an assessment of the health of watersheds. And so we haven't really gotten into the specifics like you mentioned. But
is this not a pretty good model for addressing such issues, especially along the coast when we've lost 95% of our wetlands?
Sure. I think the piece that I'm struggling with is how to incorporate that sort of data into the assessment. So if you're aware of any data sets that could help inform our assessment by.
Sure, the Department of Sanitation allows the water to be thrown out into the sanitary sewer. So there are pumping systems for this diversion of the water that is quantified. It's not quantified as well as it should be. It's generally estimated, guesstimated would be a much better word, which developer interests, have an effect there. But what I'm looking for is, especially for a wetland that is dependent on this fresh water, to have actual assessments be done that would be accountable, that would be accurate. So far we have the Department of Sanitation putting in general numbers for how much is being pumped and actually diverted away. We also have the LA Regional Water Quality Control Board that was unaware it was being even thrown out to the sea because it goes into a catch basin first, which they thought it percolated into the earth, but it does not. It has a clay liner, so it prevents that from happening in the main, and it is simply sent out to the ocean. So that needs to be quantified. There are basics numbers on that, but any volumes of water like that, as the Coastal Commission said, are detrimental to the hydrology of a wetland. So even if you were using just some of the basic numbers that we already have established for this site, those numbers could be put in.
Sure, if you can add a link to the data sets or fill out the data set form so that we can take a look and try and figure out if it makes sense to incorporate them into our landscape assessment of watershed health. It sounds like, though, that the assessment you might be thinking about is a little bit more specific and focused on wetlands, which would be outside of the scope of the watershed assessment at this point, because we're just trying to, if you've been on most of the call, there's a lot of things to consider and think about in terms of how to objectively and robustly assess the health of watersheds. So also incorporating a totally different ecosystem like wetlands would be a little bit too much at this point, but I think we love data, so if we can figure out a way that makes sense to incorporate it.
Well, sure. Do we not have also, what is it? I'm not sure if it's USGS, but assessments on groundwater availability, because this is a lot of groundwater that moves through this area normally and historically. And what are the numbers on that from a watershed standpoint? This is all, this is groundwater and also rainwater when it's allowed to percolate in.
Mm-hmm. Nick, you were going to say something? Yeah.
I was going to say, okay. No, I appreciate what she's saying. I'd love to get her information so that you can contact me. There's actually a wetland specific work group that would be the most appropriate people to help you with this issue, and I think they could probably bring in some of the the groundwater people at the State Water Board as well to help kind of investigate and see to help better clarify the issues and maybe see if there's a path forward. But rather than the entire wetland, or not the watershed group, this particular group, I would suggest we work with the wetland work group, which is specifically deals with wetlands, and would be the expertise that I would want to engage with. So if you have access to the chat, I can put my contact information. You can reach out to me directly, and we can kind of move forward from there.
I'm not sure that I see any chat. I've just got the agenda pulled up on this. Because I'm on the phone. It's not like a Zoom call that I have, unless you had a Zoom on this also.
It is a Teams meeting, which is similar to Zoom's, but I think the email probably came from me.
So where would that be on here? And you are, I'm sorry.
He's muted, but that's Nick Martorano. And
sorry, what is the name again?
Nicholas Martorano.
Can you spell the last name for me, please?
Sure. Let me figure out.
This is Cliff Harvey. I do some work with the Wetland Work Group also. What's the name of the person who is speaking right now?
Patricia McPherson. I'm Grassroots Coalition. I'm also Sierra Club, Airport Marina Group, which we've been working to protect this area for the past over 20 years. And we have been successful, but
do you have an email address you could provide to us, and Nick and I will get in touch?
Sure. Can I just tell you? My name is Patricia, Patricia McPherson, McPherson, and the number 1 at Verizon.net.
Are there any dots or spaces there, or is it all just run together?
Patricia McPherson 1, which is that number 1, at Verizon.net.
Okay, Nick, did you copy that?
Yep.
Okay. If you want to take the lead on that, Nick, I'd appreciate it, but just CC me, and if I can assist, I'll try.
Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Awesome. And it looks like we had 45 folks and we're down to 11. The connection, I think, dropped for a lot of us, unfortunately. So if folks don't have any other comments, we'll end the meeting today and hopefully see you on December, see your initials, hear from you on December 9th.
All right,
okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ollie. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Cliff. Thanks, everyone.
And everybody involved with getting the meeting going. Appreciate all the hard work that goes into that.
Awesome. All right.